Are you a business owner or human resource professional looking for quality advice and resources to help better manage the talent in your business? TalentTalks.net is a powerful online reference library with practical guides, tools, and templates covering the full employee lifecycle from recruitment to retirement. Visit TalentTalks.net to browse an extensive collection of articles, podcasts, and videos in our reference library, or sign up as a member to access a suite of talent management tools and resources developed by our panel of experts for a nominal monthly fee. Talent Talks. Quality resources tested in the real world.
Well, good morning, everyone, and welcome to this Talent Talks webinar. My name is Lita Curry, and I will be your host for today. Now, as you heard, Talent Talks is an online platform with quality resources available to you that have been tested in the real world. So as a business owner or as an HR practitioner, you can use these resources to maximize your people's contribution. You can find us on www.talenttalks.net, or you can follow us on LinkedIn. Now, we have quite a treat for you today. We've got an amazing panel of experts with many years of experience in the field of people management and human resources. Now, our topic for today is people priorities for 2021. And at the cusp of this new year, especially coming out of the year that we've had in 2020, we really have a unique ability to sit back, to reflect, and to plan deliberately around what we're going to be focusing on around the people agenda for the year to come. Now, as Trevor said, you're welcome to share your ideas in the chat and make comments throughout the webinar. We'd like to make it as interactive as possible. But if you have a question, please use the Q&A. We're going to try and get to all the questions. The panelists will also be answering off on the side. But if we can't get to all the questions, and we might very well not, we're going to be answering them on the website. So please look out for that. Now, before I introduce our panel, I'd like to say a quick word from our sponsor for this webinar, JEC Technologies Group. Trevor, you can show the slide. Right, so our sponsor for today is JEC Technologies Group. Now, they provide an end-to-end remote workforce solution, keeping you safe and productive throughout this pandemic. Now, 2020 was an unprecedented year that really created personal and business challenges for all of us. JEC Technologies, along with their partners Microsoft, have created solutions to empower your remote workers and really enable your business and your processes to function effectively from anywhere. They add simple, quantifiable value that empowers your team, drives your business goals. They are a Tier 1 Gold Microsoft Cloud partner and managed service provider, and you can get hold of them on www.jettech.co.za. Thank you for that, Trevor. So we'd like to start off with our first poll for the day. And the poll here really just focuses on getting some information from you guys to say, what are you going to be focusing on in terms of your people agenda for 2021? Now you'll see, Trevor, you can launch the poll. There's going to be a couple of options that you can choose from. It is also a multiple response, so you can choose more than one option at the same time. So for you, your organization, what are you focusing on for your people agenda in this year? Is it reviewing the reward strategy, to reflect the changing workplace? Is it employee health and well-being? Is it upskilling managers to really manage in that remote environment that we find ourselves in? Is it building key capabilities for future skills? Is it enriching that employee experience in a remote environment? Or it might very well be something else. So we're going to give you a couple of seconds to answer the poll. Let's give it another 10 or so seconds, 10, 15 seconds. If you've chosen number 6, something else, it would be really interesting if you can put that into the chat as a comment so that we can see, if we don't have it covered in our poll, what else are you going to be focusing on for 2021? Interesting. So number 4 coming out at 65%, building key capabilities for future skills. And we're going to have a conversation around what those skills would be and how do you need to focus on them. I see employee well-being, health and well-being is quite a high priority as well, as is upskilling managers to manage in a remote environment. And remember, if you've chosen, those 12% who've chosen something else, please put that in the chat for us so that we can have a look at that. Thank you very much for that. You can close the poll now so that you don't see the results anymore. And let's get into our panel. I'd like to introduce our esteemed panel to you today. Panel, as I call your name, you're welcome to put your camera on. The first person that we've got on our panel today is Kirk Kruger. Now, Kirk is an experienced reward professional with implementation success in all forms of reward. What Kirk doesn't know about reward is not worth knowing. He has worked in multiple sectors of the economy and at a pan-African level as well. He's experienced in both the design and the implementation of reward strategies, guaranteed pay programs, short and long-term incentive programs, reward processes, executive remuneration, and remuneration committees. Kirk, welcome and thank you for joining us. The next person that we have on our panel is Sarah Babb. Now, Sarah has worked with enabling a more positive and impactful change through working with leaders and organizations and systems as a whole. Now, she's designed various exciting programs and led teams with working through different scenarios, working through culture change, organizational learning, and leadership change, and always drawing on her diverse anthropology and sociology background. So very interesting background and interesting experiences that she's bringing in there. The next panelist is Linda van der Loo. She is a learning executive and a thought leader with over 25 years experience in multiple learning roles across corporate and vendor institutions. And she focuses on learning, on e-learning, digital learning, digital technology across Africa. Now, Linda says she engages with business leaders who are focused on driving future skills, skills relevancy, and reskilling strategies. So I'm really looking forward to the conversation with her. And finally, last but not least, Vanessa Crawford is an experienced HR practitioner with a career spanning over 20 years and across 3 continents. She tells me she's driven by enabling people to realize their potential, and she takes pride in optimizing the employment relationship by facilitating a win-win opportunity for both the employee and the organization. As a group HR executive, her goals are to elevate the talent agenda by aligning individual growth with company growth. And currently, she is the acting group HR executive for Advitech. Panel, welcome and thank you for joining us. Kirk, I'd like to start with you. And my first question is, in 2020, we really saw that the whole working from home environment could work very well. Our whole environment has changed around that. In this new work from home paradigm, how do you think companies should be thinking about how and where their employees work going forward?
Thank you, Lita, and good morning to the attendees. Lita, I think what is really the pandemic has brought in is that flexible working or remote working is no longer a sideshow. I think companies grappled with this. Sometimes they paid lip service, put a bit of a policy in place, but never really embraced it seriously. And the pandemic has now forced us to really accept this as the way of the future. But having said that, there's not a one-size-fits-all solution. I think what companies need to be contemplating is probably a hybrid model. Need to think about what is the workforce going to look like going forward. And there's probably 3 components that they need to take into account. There are certain roles and certain individuals that will function really well working from home. And that could really be a long-term arrangement. A company like Standard Chartered, for instance, is planning to have 90% of their workforce working remotely during the next 3 years. So that's very much an area that companies need to think about. Then the kind of middle category is the work near to home category. And what we're seeing here is a lot of interesting thinking around creating work hubs that are situated in certain locations that are practical for the employees. So instead of everybody converging on one major head office every day, what we see is the thinking around creating these near-to-home hubs where people who want to collaborate, perhaps they're struggling a bit with their technology, they can come together there, spend a bit of time, perhaps have a few meetings, do a team interaction. So that's a very interesting and I think important category. And then the last one is going to be that people are going to work from the office. That's also not going to go away completely. And so companies, they need to be thinking about what does their permanent office arrangement look like into the future. It's probably going to be quite a bit smaller, probably a lot more around a hot desk model. And so really these are the three components that I think companies need to be wrestling with. As I said, it's not a sideshow anymore. This is now the reality, and I think we should design our work and our workspaces in line with this.
Yeah, it's really pushed us into the future in terms of work from home. I had a conversation with a friend of mine in the Netherlands last night, and she's working for one of the big accounting firms, and she said that the accounting firm has sent an email to their employees saying, come fetch a desk and a chair from the office and put that in your house if you need a desk and a chair. So things are really changing in the way we're looking at where employees work. Thank you for that. You're also interested in attraction and retention, specifically around key skills. How do you think that will play out in the coming year and the coming years, specifically around attraction and retention of key skills, Kirk?
So a very interesting dynamic, and there's some of my fellow panelists who have a lot of experience in this and can also share their thoughts. But previously, companies were looking for talent, and one of the constraining factors was geography. And typically, that meant that their talent pool changed in nature because, if you wanted that role to be at your head office in Johannesburg, well, naturally, you're going to be looking in the Johannesburg area or in South Africa. What we're seeing now is that it's not constrained anymore. Some of the best talent are living where they choose to live around the world, and they can now actually be in play as far as our talent program goes. So that we've removed that barrier. We do need to think about different time zones, but certainly the attraction component, I think, has made life a lot more interesting in that the pool that we can fish in is a lot more interesting. And then around retention, Lita, I think definitely employees, as this pandemic has rolled on and will continue to roll on for a while, are very interested in, is their company taking remote working seriously? Are they providing the means, the mechanisms, the tools? And some people may choose to stay with the company purely because they've embraced remote working in a serious way. And then, has the company provided the lifestyle benefits, or are they moving towards providing the lifestyle benefits that are important when we're working from home? One of the things that people are very appreciative of, and a time when there's a lot of stress and perhaps some grief as this pandemic affects all of us, is a lifestyle program that includes counseling, that really provides employee support, and really makes sure that everybody is in good mental health as this pandemic draws out. So I think those are the two dynamics that stand out for me in the attraction and retention space.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for that. I see some of the questions and comments are coming from the chat. Please keep going with the chat. If you have any comments, maybe share with us, how is your organization thinking about working from home, and what are some of those key skills and retention strategies that you're thinking about going forward? Interesting conversation I had earlier on in the week with a colleague in the States, and he's saying to me, a lot of employees are starting to do a zip code exercise. Zip code meaning where you want to live. And he says you make a list of the values that's important to you in terms of the place where you want to live. You find a place that suits all of those, and you can basically work then from anywhere in the world. So I think a lot of people are already starting to see that change. Now, Kirk, final question for you before we move on. This has been quite a difficult year for certain organizations. We've seen a drop in turnover. We've seen a drop in profits. It obviously impacts on the bottom line. Some people have had to take salary cuts. There's been some retrenchments in many organizations. The question is, how can we protect our employees' lifestyle, our lives, and their livelihoods from a total rewards perspective? What is your take on that?
Yes, Lita, I think one of the things that stands out is that I think at the moment employment is highly valued, and that people may be prepared to adjust their expectations that a job is better than no job. And one of the things that we are seeing that's being done quite well in Europe is the notion of work rotation. So people move on to perhaps a shortened work week or a shared role where really one tries to avoid retrenchment. But that does mean there's a quid pro quo. People perhaps need to consider the scenario of no salary increase, but in a low cost or low inflation environment like we have at the moment, that is not necessarily the end of the world. But I think to protect jobs, which is very important, we should really think about how can we rotate work, share work, come up with creative ways of keeping as many people employed as possible, even if they perhaps are earning slightly less. That would definitely be better than no earnings at all.
Yeah, great. I think what a lot of people are doing that I'm seeing is that they're becoming slashies. They're finding different jobs off on the side, or they really launch that small business that they've been thinking about, or pivoting and doing something different. So maybe the employee contract is also changing. So for you, in our both in our panel and our participants, if you've seen examples of those, please share those in the chat as well, so that we can have a look at them. Kirk, thank you very much. We might come back to you with a couple of questions, so you're welcome to look at the Q&A as well. Next, I'd like to move on to Sarah Babb. Sarah, you've written a fantastic article for us recently in Talent Talks, where you talk about how having a future orientation will help teams through the continued upheaval in 2021. Now, we've gone through this horrible pandemic in 2020, and we thought we could see the light at the end of the tunnel, just to see that was actually the second wave coming. So I think a lot of people are tired. A lot of people are really struggling emotionally, mentally, and they're struggling with performance, and they're struggling to keep their teams motivated. So my question to you would be, what in our organizational cultures will help us sustain our performances and sustain our businesses in 2021 and beyond?
Thanks, Lita. Yes, I've certainly seen that too in different organizations. In fact, somebody commented quite alarmingly yesterday that when you ask how you're feeling, they said they're feeling dead. So I thought that was really quite a state.
Wow.
And I think because there's a familiarity, now we're into year 2 of this, there's a familiarity like, oh, we're going to have another year like this. There's depletion and exhaustion, but the pressures of the business are almost becoming more, because as you just mentioned, with restructuring and people losing jobs, there's more pressure on the people that remain to actually deliver and to change and to keep carrying the ship. So I think that's definitely something to be aware of. So how do we help people through that year? It's not about being naive or Pollyanna-ish and saying, oh, but it's all going to get better. I think that is certainly not helpful, because we won't believe that. But it's actually looking at what is your orientation to that future. So there's interesting work that's been done around hope, not hope in the sense of it's going to be rainbow, but hope in the sense of, can I see an alternate future? Can I see my way through to actually making this work? Can I see my way to finding a better quality of life in this, so that I can sustain myself in all of these changes, because there are more changes coming. There's wave 3, there's wave 4, there's different variants, there's economy challenges, there's global shifts happening as well. So absolutely, I think one of the key things to consider in your organizations is, how are you helping people think about those futures? Do they have a way of looking at scenarios? Because at the end of the day, what we're also dealing with is constant, endless restructuring. So it's interesting speaking to different organizations each week, because invariably somebody would have left, somebody would have come in, roles would have changed, there'll be a different reporting line, a different structure. So that also takes an agility, a capacity to be agile in working with that change. So when we think about future fit skills in the organization, it's not just having hope of the end state, but there's a sense of hope that I can actually work with these constant changes, so that I have that mental agility that I have that cognitive ability, not only emotional agility, but I quite like a term that's come through, dispositional agility. Can I literally shift from week to week to say, this week I'm playing this role, that week I'm playing the next role, and so that it doesn't become this tumultuous wave, but becomes more of a gentle curve. And that's the capacity, is how do I live with change, knowing that there's always going to be a different future emerging. And that brings a sort of an ease or a lightness to say, I can be open to what's coming. I know I can do this because we've built that capacity to work with constant change. So the agility is one thing related to hope. The other thing related to hope, it's a particular type of future orientation, whereas skepticism or despair is another future orientation. But if you're building that sense of hope, another capacity that underpins that is efficacy. If I feel I can see a future, but I feel if I put in an amount of effort, it'll bring that future, that if I do something, it'll make a difference, that can really help connect people in your teams and can help sustain that energy that you speak of. So how do we get efficacy in your teams? I think one thing that's happened naturally, as teams have splintered or not, working from WFA, working from anywhere, as we've just heard, different categories, there has been a devolving of decision making. There has been an allowance of teams to make decisions because things have changed so fast that teams have naturally picked up a bit more decision-making power, capacity to bring about the changes that they want. So that efficacy, I think, is positive. I think if people can see that if I put in that effort, if I make that change, if I improve a process, I can see the results coming through. That's really something to continue working with. And it's definitely the trend of the devolved, networked, self-directed work teams. So that's one way of structuring in that way of the teams being able to look at futures, but also build that efficacy to actually get there. I think one thing that's concerning to me that will deplete people is what I call parallel universes. And this is where so many organizations are in that change. So they're automating processes, they're building the systems to work more sustainably in a different way of working or operating model. But at the same time, many people still have the pressure of the BAU, of the deliverables, of the month end, of those reports, of the work that needs to get done every day. So what that does is, I think it's called cognitive overload, or the cognitive depletion, where you, in 1 minute, you're in an agile team, you're being creative, you're innovative, you're working with cutting edge processes, but the very next minute you're working with old spreadsheets, you've got the old reporting lines, you've got, so it really is, takes its load on people, and that's depleting. So of course, that is necessary, but one thing to consider is how do you help people transition more quickly into the new way of working? Because what I'm seeing happen, I'm not sure what people are seeing as the attendees, is that you might have a fancy new digital process that'll save time, that'll support you in your work, but people are working with the old workaround systems, with the old spreadsheets, with the old way of doing things, because I'm familiar, I know I can work with this. So in the one team, I'm loving collaborating across the business. I'm being able to get things done. But on the other hand, it's easier sometimes just to get my head down and do things by myself. So we've got these like parallel universes that are really quite stretching for people. So either we help people transition quicker into the new way of working, because speed is of the essence. In the past, we maybe have 2-3 years to bring about a new operating model, a new culture, new processes. Now it's really a sense of months or weeks to actually turn things around. Or it's at least acknowledging for people and giving them more space to acknowledge what are those shifts that you're making each and every day that actually is quite draining on your brain to keep making those shifts. So let me pause there for a moment. Those are some thoughts to kick us off.
It's fascinating, and I love the term dispositional agility. How do we let go of some of that control? How do we actually build a capability within our team so that we don't necessarily just have very particular roles? It leads me to the next question that I wanted to ask you, and in terms of how do we change our strategies going forward? I think a lot of companies have good intentions around making a strategic change in order to make use of the new opportunities in 2021, but they sometimes really get stuck in, as you say, the business as usual, the old way of doing things. What are the capabilities that we need to build in order to allow the organization to make that change and to make it at pace?
So maybe two thoughts to kick off with. If I think of the beginning of last year, January last year, I was working with a retail organization, and we just happened to have covered scenarios and futures thinking in January. So it was an amazing process to see, because that team then actually kicked into working with, as soon as they heard some of their suppliers in Wuhan, that the pandemic was emerging, immediately started putting in scenarios in place for their business planning, and were able to then adjust really quickly in terms of processes for people working from home, looking at what to do with future planning, with their stock, their merchandising, bringing the supply chain to South Africa. They could turn around really, really quickly. So I think we can't underestimate that futures thinking capacity, working with scenarios in terms of having multiple strategic options. I think many organizations have horizon 1, 2, and 3, but again, that's assuming it's this linear that we can plan things out over time. We've lost that. So it's more a case of how do we actually work with alternatives within our organization, be trying different areas, be trying different products, using a lot more data to actually make decisions quicker, but always having that next scenario in mind. So that futures thinking in scenarios is really a capacity we all need to have to help us think through that we've always got a second plan. So I've also been working with an events organization at the moment, and imagine trying to plan events. You just don't know when an international event will be able to happen. So I think there's also the sense of being able to continue learning. So how do we have generative learning? Do we, in every meeting, every week, every opportunity, just bank? What have we learned about how we work, what we have learned, what's working for us, what our clients want, where our market's shifting, so that it remains fresh, that learning is not just a checklist. Have I learned Power BI? Have I learned coding? Have I learned, have I done that module on LinkedIn? But it becomes a lived experience of literally every day. What are we sensing in our environment and our clients shifting? Because there are big shifts happening now. And some are exciting opportunities to be able, as South Africa, to reach more globally or across the continent, as we've heard, reaching with talent and other opportunities. So I think those are two initial thoughts on that.
Yeah, now, very interesting around the scenario planning. I was on a webinar the other day where people say, we used to have 5-year plans, we used to have 10-year plans. Now we have 30-day plans, and that's all you can plan for, because you actually just don't know what's going to happen more out than that. And again, on those scenarios and on those 30-day plans, you need to be able to change them. So you can't be too close to them. You can't be too married to them. You might need to let them go every now and then. And I like the idea around the learning reflection. What did we learn, and how can we use that going forward? Now, Sarah, you're also an organizational design expert. How have you seen trends in organizational design change over the last year or so? And what is your view for 2021 around OD?
Sorry, I was interrupting you earlier because I wanted to add, but that would lead to the question, because that's exactly what I see with OD, is that we have it for linking from your strategy. So what I see that's quite disturbing is we have idealistic strategies that are not based on where the organization's at. So if I think of one organization in my mind at the moment, they want to transform from quite a traditional provider to be a digital online platform business. And that sounds lovely, and Exco's bought into it and they really commit, like, yes, that's where we need to be, but it's actually completely divorced to where their current reality is. So this is where I think organizational development and organizational design is key. I'm worried because I don't believe that the way the organization is structured or the capacity they have can make that leapfrog. Literally, they've not employed, they've not structured, they don't have the technology, the platforms, the market, the reputation, the intellectual capital to make that shift. It's not to say it's impossible, but when you're looking at the organizational development side, I think you really need to start from a premise of where are we currently? Do we have examples of that ideal future where we are digital and innovative and creative? And how do we amplify that across the organization? So we're not starting from scratch with this old top-down, trickle-down approach to develop or change culture or new skills, but you're literally saying, well, actually in this little unit, we've got quite a strong capacity of custom orientation and innovation and, processing or redesigning processes and products. So let's look at what's working there and how do we then grow from the inside out. So it's really a change in focus and OD of, again, not having this idealized design, but looking at opportunities to experiment, grow, prototype. Let's see how we can build this capacity from the get-go. So it's real time, it's really landing in the market, you're really growing capacity from doing and not from this, we'll build skills and then wait to see what happens. And that affects your organizational design, because that means you will have those pockets where you bring team together, where you give resources, where you give time. That's the other thing. Are you giving time for people to actually shift to the future, and actually giving the technology and the processes to support that? So I think that's certainly one of the things I'm seeing. I call it this sort of making the shift from today and not from tomorrow. The other thing about organizational design and development very much links to are we designing work for well-being? Not just are we finding well-being at work, but are we actually designing work for well-being? What I mean there is, have we integrated the people and the process interfaces? Again, we can have beautiful processes, but unless we've integrated with what's needed and where are people actually going to benefit from that, that we look at that interface a lot more closely in our design. At the moment, there's a divorce between here's our strategy and operating model and here's our processes, and the people must somehow fit in. But I think using design thinking and using that facilitated interface, you can be designing well-being into work. So when we design a process, have we thought about where people are, where the client is, how we can actually ensure that we're allowing responsiveness and capacity from the get-go? So I think it's definitely a growing trend to look more carefully at what are we designing for, who are we as a business, and how do we develop and design our work and our people to actually deliver on that promise at the end of the day. Because it does feel a bit precarious to have this idealized process, but not really a way forward to build the teams, the capacity, and the opportunities to actually reach that strategic turnaround.
Yeah, interesting. Sarah, thank you for that. I know that we have a couple of OD specialists in our audience. I know that we have some strategic planning specialists as well. So guys, please share your comments on what was just discussed in the chat. Share with us what you've seen, share with us the trends, share with us maybe some of the stories and the experiences that you've gone through. That would be really interesting. So Sarah spoke about the particular capabilities that we have to build in this new environment, and that's a very nice segue into our next panelist, Linda van der Loo, who is really a learning and development expert. So Linda, I am sure that 2020 was quite an interesting year for learning and development. It's been a completely different environment. We've been trying to push online learning and e-learning and learning on your own for a long time. Why don't you share with us some of those trends that you've seen during the pandemic? And I'm sure some of those trends have been pretty positive. What has been your experience?
Hello, Lita, and hi everyone, and thanks for having me. So maybe the first part is a personal story. For a long time, I've wanted to work from home, and work from home for me is working from Plettenberg Bay. And so the beautiful story about work from home was I was able to move to Plettenberg Bay and work from there. And frankly, it's been an unbelievable experience. So for me, from a learning perspective, that whole work from home kind of shifts into the learn from home, and if you're an L&D person, what does learn from home mean? It means that yes, we no longer have face-to-face classrooms, but we have face-to-face virtual engagements. It means that, in my mind, our L&D folks have really had to pivot and shift quite significantly. And when I'm talking to people, I say, walk 2 days in the shoes of your learner. And I think, and I can see you looking, Lisa, I don't think we've done that in the past in learning. We've said to someone, you go on an Excel course, and they book them on and off they go. Now we're not going on an Excel course. And by the way, you need to go through that program online because it's key to you understanding the world of your learner, So I think, to be honest with you, without stating the obvious, Lita, is the digital experience of the pivot outside of everything else, has been an incredible opportunity for L&D to grab and literally shift and take it on and step up into a world where digital now truly is embedded in learning, firstly, but more importantly, it's part of how we show up to business to deliver learning at the speed of business. And I think with that, what I've seen is, and it's interesting that the poll, I just want to pull it up here, was building capabilities for future skills. Yeah. That squarely puts L&D at a table and under a spotlight. Yeah. And my question is, how are we showing up? What are we doing? You know, what are we doing differently as L&D folks? So in terms of the gift of COVID, outside of working from home and learning from home, it's given us an opportunity, honestly, to deliver learning, in my mind, at the speed of business. But we're going to have to be, as L&D folks, very innovative and very agile in terms of how we shift and pivot on this thing.
Well, that leads me to a question around, you know, as L&D practitioners, we have structures, we've got models, we put things together in a particular way. We know exactly how to build learning. In this new world, you know exactly what I'm talking about. In this new world, what do we maybe need to let go of as learning and development professionals, or in our learning and development strategy for our organization?
Do you want my honest answer?
Absolutely.
My honest answer is we're going to have to let go of Addy. But we're going to have to keep the A of Addy. That's the first piece. And I think, you know, Addy is, and if anyone who doesn't know Addy, it's an analyze, design, develop, implement, and evaluate. It's kind of like the old school way of how we implemented learning. And then, Werner, subject for you, the 70-20-10 is how we deliver learning, you know, and how we put it in play. Yeah. But I think, yeah, you know, I think what, you know, to be serious, those models are grounded and they give us good anchorage. My sense is that, and I'm seeing this where I'm working with organizations, is if you don't understand how to curate content, if you don't understand what data is in your world of learning, if you don't understand how to virtually facilitate, in other words, not just death by PowerPoint over Teams, if you don't understand that, and you're not what I would call this transformer L&D, and in fact, I wrote an article, and I was trying to check when it was for Talent Talks about 2-3 weeks ago on the transformer CLO and the skills that people probably need going forward. If you're not that change maestro in an L&D place, I think you can put all the models in the world in place for you as a learning development person. If you're not showing up as a curator, as a data specialist, as a virtual facilitator, as a change maestro, you know what, you're just not going to make it, in my mind. And I know that sounds terrible, but that is what it is.
Yeah, no, I mean, we're facing that reality at the moment where people need to be able to curate content. The responsibility for learning is clearly moving to the learner, to the employee in the organization.
Yeah.
But the problem is there's so much out there on the internet, on all various platforms. How do they find the best thing? How do they find that one thing that's really going to make a difference in their skill? And that's where the learning and development practitioner comes in terms of curating that content, saying, here's the best course. This is what you need to go through. What do we need to allow learners to do by themselves? How do we let go of some of that control that we are very, very married to as learning and development professionals?
Yeah, look, I think there's elements of control for compliance and governance in terms of reporting and scorecard and, you know, all of that stuff. And I don't think that needs to, I mean, that must stay. And that technically should be managed through an LMS on a system where you do it, and you literally, that's 1/20 of your day job. Yeah. The other part is, in my mind, is looking at, and I don't know how to say this differently, is we're going to have to give the learner what I call a GPS. And I talk about that GPS, saying give them, and in Afrikaans terms, you say give them rigting. You know, give them rigting, give them direction, give them a place to go and help them get there. So if you take the GPS analogy, when you're turning left and you should be turning right, it says turn around, make a U-turn. That's what L&D should be up to. Give them a GPS on the basis of these are the skills that we believe in your role you will need to know for the future. And here are the mechanisms to do that. And we as L&D will put guardrails around that to help you in that direction. And the one way of putting a GPS in place is to make sure that you've got this captured in a place that's curated content with pathways and those kind of things. So I think my big takeaway is to give learners a GPS and give them where they're going. The one thing that, and I saw this, you know, in a previous life, we set up a program called the Reskilling Revolution, and it was really to say, what skills do you stop focusing on and what skills do you start focusing on? And I know Sarah was part of that project, but the whole point is to stop looking at old skills and start building new skills or future skills. Those future skills are what the L&D and workforce planning and OD people say, here's your GPS, off you go. So I hope I've answered the question in a way that makes it a little bit more practical, you know.
Yeah, I like that. Excellent. Thank you, Linda. I'd like to hear from our audience. I see the chat is going, which is fantastic. Please let us know around, you know, particular trends that you've seen in learning and development, what you've experienced over the last couple of months and the last year, and where you think your organization should be going in terms of building those future fit skills and those future fit capabilities. It'd be really interesting to hear from the audience. Remember also to keep your questions coming so that we can have a couple of questions to answer at the end. We're going to be picking up on the chat a little bit later. Linda, thank you for your insights.
Only a pleasure.
Next, I'd like to get to Vanessa Crawford-Van. Welcome. It's great to have you here. My question for you is a very practical one. As the HR executive for an education company, education has been a tricky business to be in the last year, and I can imagine that you've had to pivot quite quickly and make a couple of changes. What is your people strategy going forward into 21? What have you seen in 2020, and how are you taking that into account going forward?
Hi, Lita. Thanks so much. It's a great question, and I'm still trying to figure it out myself. So, as being part of an education service provider has been absolutely fascinating at this time, because in a way HR has trailed the business changes. Then we played a little bit of catch up, and I think we're now probably suitably positioned to enable the business moving forward. But to all of the moms here, you'll remember what level 5 lockdown was like. And I can tell you, yes, exactly. I still have a lingering headache. But I can tell you that in our organization, it was just around running on this treadmill. We had teachers who, lockdown started just as the holidays were starting. So instead of taking, our usual leisurely breaks, we had to actually just put our foot on the accelerator. We had to literally pivot from face-to-face learning into the online learning. So that was our product. We were in a fortunate position because we already had wonderful platforms in place in anticipation of doing online learning and hybrid learning in the future. But we still had to ramp up capability. The teachers spent all of the holidays basically redesigning the curriculum. So we can't deliver a face-to-face curriculum on an online platform. And probably our biggest challenge from that perspective was, how do we deliver the level of pastoral care, which is what sort of private education is known for. So that was quite a challenge, and took a lot of very clever people, much cleverer than myself, putting their heads together to figure that one out and solve it. And then, of course, we were running this sort of parallel program in the organization for employees. So basically learning from the business, and pivoting our learning modules, our leadership development modules, our NDPs, etc., into the online space. And there, I think the biggest challenge for us, because we focus on quite practical courses, was how do we actually sort of drive a level or a sense of collaboration. And again, I think employees solved that for us. I think naturally people were just so incredibly agile, and in their stride, they started, collaborating. They started leveraging the tools and collaborating. We did a couple of pulse surveys to understand where employees were at, each point in this sort of lockdown process. And we found that individuals were taking it upon themselves to contact their colleagues, to find out how they are, you know, those who were single and maybe a little bit bored or lonely, those who were more, you know, harried with kids running around, you know, caregivers. So basically employees took accountability and took the lead. And that's probably the biggest lesson for us as HR practitioners in this business, is that we don't necessarily have to strategize and plan, you know, to every, you know, tiny detail. You know, the business just in the flow of business, you know, sort of shifts. So yeah, so it's been fascinating, to say the least.
Well, it leads me to the next question, because, I mean, probably apart from being a doctor or a nurse, being a teacher in 2020 must have been absolutely hectic. And I would imagine that your teachers are starting to be tired, your employees are starting to be run down. How are you looking after their health and well-being in 2021? Do you have a particular plan or particular approach to that?
Absolutely. I've seen a lot of the comments and questions on the chat also have been talking about employees who can't work from home. And it is certainly seen as a benefit to be able to work from home. And teachers, like nurses, can't work from home. They have to be, you know, even when we're doing hybrid lessons, you know, they're in the classroom, face-to-face with some and online for others. And I can tell you that the teachers are exhausted, because I don't think there's been a year where people haven't, you know, been able to take holidays and take breaks. Yeah, the wellness framework that we sort of on the fly created last year in 2020 is going to be absolutely the focus of 2021. Because we have to have people, you know, who are in the office, in the classroom. We created a partnership with SADC, actually, which of course is a non-profit organization. And the wonderful thing about partnering with SADC as, you know, an EAP is that they service not only our employees, but also their families. So it's such a wonderful thing as we're going through this crazy time, and teachers are just switched on all the time, 24/7, that we're also enabling them to enable their families, you know, with SADC, with this partnership with SADC. I wish I could say it was, you know, we were doing it ourselves as HR practitioners, but we're leveraging our sort of talent ecosystem. So mental well-being is huge for us. We also are planning a significant number of webinars. It was a great hit for our teachers last year, just looking at things like resilience, building resilience, managing anxiety, and just trying to keep a little bit ahead of it, just trying to put some nice support systems in place for people who, as I say, are at, you know, the pioneers at the forefront of the pandemic.
Yeah. Absolutely critical to look after those people, because they do such an important job. Van, thank you very much for that. What I'd like to do in our last couple of minutes together is I'm going to hand over in a couple of minutes to Werner Oberholzer, who's my fellow director for Talent Talks, just to kind of talk through maybe some of the questions that have been asked. I haven't been able to pick up on the chat. I've got it here off on the side, but I can't read everything. So Werner, if you can take a minute or so when I hand over to you in a couple of seconds, just to highlight some of those comments and maybe some of the questions that have come out. So while Werner is getting ready for that, I'd like to tell you a little bit more about Talent Talks. You know, in the area of managing people, in the area of HR, I know that I sometimes get stuck when I have to do something for a client or something for an organization, because I don't have expertise in everything. HR is a very wide field. Now that's where Talent Talks really come in. Do you need to design an employee engagement survey? We've got a template that you can use. Do you need to write a competence guide? We've got you covered. We can tell you how to do things. Or how about designing that total reward strategy that we spoke about with Kirk a little bit earlier? We've got a practical guide that you can implement immediately. It really comes down to having quality resources that have been tested in the real world, resources that you can take, that you can implement immediately. So please go onto talenttalks.net. You can sign up as a member, 395 Rand a month, or you can sign up annually for a 20% saving. And we've got a special running. The first 100 people to sign up will get their first month for free, so don't miss out on that. What I'd like to do now is, Werner, I'd like to hand over to you to make a couple of comments and maybe highlight some of those questions that we can give through to our panel. What have you seen on the chat?
Great, thanks, Lita. There's been some wonderful comments on the chat, also some good questions coming through in the Q&A. So thank you very much to everybody who shared their insights and build on some of the things that the panelists have said. There's one question in particular here that I want to start off with, which I thought would be a good one to put to our panelists and to give them the opportunity to respond, because this is something that I would imagine lots of businesses and lots of HR practitioners might be wondering and thinking about. And it came from one of our attendees who posted in the chat saying, I've observed that while leaders appear open to change, there's also a fear to change, which appears in their action. And this misalignment creates confusion. So how do we help leaders make this shift? Because they equally need this kind of support. So how do we help our leaders through the change processes? And I'm going to open that up to the panelists to see what thoughts they'd like to share with the attendees and any advice they've got.
Excellent. Our panel, Sarah, I see that you've put your video on. What is your response?
Yeah, I absolutely agree with the comment that as much as we can imagine or see a future, there's a lot of fear about what am I losing, what am I letting go of? And fear can be such a difficult driver, because then the tendency is to block and not even experiment. So I think one thing one can help leaders do is really help them get over their own leadership mind traps. So it's really looking at that there is a change. They would have lost a sense of control. They would have lost a sense of what their future is, and fear that they may not have a future. So people want a sense of that future. And really it is about the leaders helping craft. There was another Q&A about, can we involve people in crafting that future? So there's a sense that they have some agency in creating what that future might be, but also a realism for themselves of where would they fit in and what do they need to let go of or change to fit into that new future. And really that adaptability and that constant learning is so key for each learner. So I think there's a parallel of really helping leaders get those capacities of, again, looking at how do they learn and change and really buying into that, but also seeing that they can have a future if they can really help turn the ship around.
Awesome, thank you for that. Linda, I see your video is on. Your response.
Yeah, so I completely agree with Sarah on the agency piece, you know, and you asked me earlier about models for L&D. In my mind, any model going forward or any program that's learning orientated that doesn't deeply include the leader in the process and in the program to give feedback, give support, share insights, mentor, coach, is not going to be set up for success. The leaders are going to need to be deeply entrenched in learning engagement, in my mind. So the agency comment from Sarah, I completely agree with.
Awesome, thank you for that. Werner, I think we have time for one more comment or one more question. What else have you picked up? You're on mute.
Amateur mistake. There's also a great question which Kirk, one of our panelists, has answered in the Q&A, but I thought let's open it up to some of the other panelists as well. And that talks to the impact on creativity and innovation in our work from home and work from anywhere environment. So often creativity and innovation comes from unplanned face-to-face interaction at the workplace, those moments when we bump into other people at the coffee station or in the corridors. So how can we replace or create opportunities for this kind of interactions and these fortuitous engagements to happen in a work from home environment? And Kirk, you may want to kick off with your answer there.
Yes, thanks, Vanna. Just to perhaps repeat, if you have already read my reply, I think there's companies do need to be very deliberate about this. Research has shown that innovation, collaboration does suffer when we work from anywhere, and companies need to think about what are the technologies that can help with collaboration and innovation. So there are some technologies companies should think about investing in those. And then again, also the research has shown that leaders who are deliberate in setting up the regular one-to-ones, the brainstorming sessions, things that just become part of the cadence of how their team operates, seem to still produce good levels of innovation and collaboration. So I think there's a technology answer, but there's very much a people answer too.
Yeah, at the same time. Awesome. Thank you, Kirk, and thank you, Werner. Now, we are almost out of time, so I'd like to thank the panel for being here today and sharing your wisdom. Thank you to the participants and audience for sharing your wisdom and your comments. And thank you to JSC Technologies Group for sponsoring today. They add simple, quantifiable value to a work from home or work from anywhere solution. I'd like to tell you about our next webinar, which we've got planned for the 4th of March. And that really focuses on women in the workplace. Now, it's amazing that we still need to have conversations about this because it's still an issue. Now, there's a growing concern that the effects of lockdowns and the shifts due to the pandemic has undo many decades of gaining that equal space in the workplace. And we've got a fantastic panel of experts lined up to talk about the steps that your business can take to avoid undoing that progress and really get to gender equality in the workplace, particularly focusing on women in leadership. So please check that out. You can go and register on www.talenttalks.net, and remember to check out those quality resources tested in the real world. Please follow us on Twitter, follow us on LinkedIn, and get involved in the conversation. If you have a question, or if you want to be part of our panel, or if you want to sponsor one of these webinars, you're welcome to do that. Send an email to hello@talenttalks.net. As you exit this webinar, you'll see a survey, one question that we'd like to ask you just for your feedback. So please take the survey as you go through. Thank you very much for joining us today, and we're hoping to see you at the next one on the 4th of March. Have a good day.